Hello and welcome to another episode of the DVD Graveyard. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at Anaconda from 1997. I thought we'd get into a little bit of aquatic horror here, especially coming off of the 50th anniversary of Jaws, however long ago it was. It wasn't too long ago, I think the past couple of weeks or so. I've pretty much been watching everything but Jaws. I've been, watching Piranha, Orca, Anaconda, Killer Crocodile, stuff like that. That's kind of kind of some comfort movies for me and some good summertime movies. That's usually whenever I kind of put these on. And this is a movie I've really wanted to talk about for some time because this is one that I grew up really enjoying. I've always had a fascination for snakes and just wildlife in general. And, but particularly snakes. I've owned snakes and I've been around snakes for a long time, since I was a kid. And, so, I mean, it's just something, and I love monster movies. So, anytime I can get a good ecological horror is what I guess what you would call it. Big killer animals, again, grizzly, killer crocodile, alligator, things like that. I really enjoy those types of movies. Even, and the cheesier, the better. But to me personally, Anaconda, I think kind of stands out, because it's not a great movie. I'll be straightforward if you haven't seen it. It's not a great movie, but it is fun. I have a lot of fun watching it. And it's a little bit the effects are really well done. It does have some kind of poor CGI sequences in it, but for the most part, a lot of the time when you see the Anaconda, it is an animatronic, and the animatronic looks damn good. And I actually think that they have the animatronic now in a museum somewhere, so that if you want to see it, you can go and check that out. And I thought that was really cool. But like I said, we're kind of coming off the 50th anniversary of Jaws, so I wanted to talk about something, that was sort of a Jaws ripoff. And even on the back of this DVD, it says Anaconda is like Jaws on the Amazon River. So Jaws spawned so many just random kind of rip-off movies, like I was talking about earlier. Orca and Up from the Depths, Piranha, Killer Crocodile. There's a plethora of Jaws rip-offs and even Jaws sequels. And this is definitely, like I said, kind of stands out to me to be one of the better ones. And I know that they're supposedly supposed to be making a remake of Anaconda this year. I think around December, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. I think I read about it recently. So I was like, well, that's a good time for me to talk about this. I've just watched it. So, it's, and it's a movie, like I said, I grew up with, that I really enjoyed. It's one I had on VHS back in the day, and it's one I used to watch just over and over again. And, it's one I find myself always, kind of coming back to. But that's just a little bit of personal history about the movie. So we'll kind of get into it. I will read the brief plot synopsis that's on the back of this DVD that I have. The one I have, it actually has the VHS cover, which is probably the cover I'll use for this video. I'll try to throw one up there of the other cover art that you usually get with it, which is just that typical kind of early 2000s artwork where you see, they're really capitalizing off of Jennifer Lopez and Ice Cube and Jon Voight and, Eric Stoltz, that they have all of them on the cover. And I mean, it's not terrible, but I prefer this original cover art. It's just very menacing and it really fits the movie well. I'm not a stickler for cover art, but I do appreciate good cover art. But like I said, on the back of this one, it has a very brief synopsis, and it basically just says, in the search for a lost civilization, they stumble onto a discovery that will literally take your breath away. And that's it. And that's a very kind of vague description of the movie, but I mean, it kind of gets the job done, I suppose. So, and I guess that's kind of what I'm here for, is to kind of, break it down some more. There will be some spoilers in this, I mean, this movie's pretty old. I mean, it's been around for a while. It's almost 30 years old at this point. So, go out and see it. If you haven't seen it, go out and check this movie out. It's a very, very good little creature feature, but I'm going to dig into it and talk about it just a little bit. Not going to go super in depth, but I'll kind of go over just kind of some of the main points of the movie. But like I said, this movie came out in 1997. It was directed by Luis Liosa, I think is how you say that. I apologize if I mispronounced that. It stars Owen Wilson, Ice Cube, John Voight, Eric Stoltz, and Jennifer friggin' Lopez, of all people, and somebody else that I'm going to mention very, very briefly. So there's a pretty big name cast in this movie, and like I said, it was later they would kind of capitalize on that, sort of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Next Generation is kind of the first one that comes to mind with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. They slapped them right on the cover to kind of sell it more. But this is kind of before they were huge. Ice Cube was still primary. He was kind of starting to break out into acting, but not really. Of course, John Voight was already fairly big. He'd been in several things. But yeah, so I mean, fairly big name cast. Like looking back on this, so that's really interesting. Immediately, like if you were to show this to someone who's never heard of it or never seen it and just thought it was a cheesy kind of monster movie, that's an interesting kind of draw in, I guess, which is why they capitalize on it, I suppose. Anyway, so we get a little opening title crawl, and it basically is just giving us some information that is, somewhat correct and somewhat incorrect about anacondas. And one of the things it says is that they will throw up their prey, just so that they can eat more. And that's not necessarily true. We'll kind of get into that later on in the movie. Something like that might happen. And then after the little opening title crawl, we get the title Anaconda, on screen. And then, after that kind of fades out, we get these really beautiful kind of opening establishing shots of just South America, just rivers and places like that. It's very peaceful and very mellow. And then we jump right into this opening sequence with Danny Trejo, of all people, and he's trying to radio someone, and it's not his voice. the ADR does not sound anything like Danny Trejo, but it is what it is. But he's basically calling for help, and we kind of get this POV style camera movement, kind of like Evil Dead, sort of, kind of moving through, above the water and kind of over the boat. And that is the snake, and it's destroying the boat. Now, we don't see the snake, we're just in the POV. We don't see it yet, but it really starts attacking this boat, trying to destroy the boat. Danny Trejo runs away, and he climbs up this big pole that's on top of the boat, and in an attempt to get away, and the camera starts to kind of follow him up there, again hinting that the snake is going up after him, and kind of looks him right in the face. If I don't know why he didn't shoot it, I don't know. He could have just leaned over and at least tried to shoot the snake, but instead he shoots himself. And that's kind of the end of Danny Trejo in this movie. A very small little role for him, but I was happy to see him in this. Of course, like I said, when I was a kid and I watched this, I didn't know anything. I didn't know who he was at all or anything like that. But now going back and looking at it, it's kind of funny. I wonder why they ADR'd his voice, because I don't know, but I definitely don't think it's Danny Trejo talking at that part, because it doesn't sound like him at all. Anyway, so after that, we kind of cut to a scene where Jennifer Lopez and Eric Stoltz. Yeah, I'm probably going to use their acting names because I don't really remember. I think her name is Terry, and his name is Professor Kale, I believe. But I'm just going to call him, J-Lo and Eric Stoltz. Don't judge me. I'm just not. I didn't write it down. It's okay. I didn't get all the actors' names in there either. I apologize. So anyway, so they're kind of just talking about the expeditions they're going to go on. Basically, they're trying to find this village or this like ancient civilization, basically a lost civilization. They're trying to find these people and make a documentary about the expedition. So that's kind of basically what they're doing there. We kind of cut to everybody boarding the boat. That's when we're introduced to, Ice Cube, Owen Wilson. There's another guy there. He's in a lot of stuff, but for some reason, I did not get his name. I didn't write his name down, but he's in a lot of stuff. His name's Westridge in the movie. He's a great character, but he's kind of the guy that is going to be the guy on the documentary, that's kind of discussing all this. Jennifer Lopez, she's some kind of researcher. Eric Stoltz, he's like the professor guy who is locating this tribe. Ice Cube is the cinematographer. Owen Wilson and his girlfriend are the sound guys, and then there is Mateo, who is the captain of the boat, is the word I'm looking for. He is, that's kind of the crew that we have. So they leave. They're kind of just going down the river. We get all these really, like I said, pretty shots of just nature. And that's one thing I'll kind of mention about this movie now, that I'll get out of the way before I forget, is that this movie shot very well. I think it's directed very well. It just looks great. I love the scenery. I love the location. It's got a really nice atmosphere to it. It feels really hot and muggy, kind of like you're in the swamp with these people. There's a lot of sweeping shots kind of over the water. There's a lot of kind of swampy looking areas, open river. It's just very, very beautiful location. The movie just looks great. That's just one big thing I can say about this. And as they're going down the river, it's just really funny because I said it's hot and muggy there, and they're all kind of talking about stuff. And Owen Wilson kind of looks over to his girlfriend. And he's like, is it just me, or does the jungle make you really horny? And that always cracks me up because it's like, bro, if it was me, I'm like, I ain't doing shit out in this heat and this humidity. Fuck that. That line always cracked me up. But him and his girlfriend are just kind of the horny couple, and that's fine. They're the stoner sound couple, whatever. They're cool. It's really funny seeing Owen Wilson in this, like, especially, nowadays, looking back on him. And he's a very minor character in this movie. But I enjoy seeing him. So anyway, a storm ends up coming and it's pouring down rain. And as they're going down the river in this pouring rain, they come across Jon Voight's character, Cerrone, and he says his propeller's broken. So they say, we'll take you on board. So they bring him on board, and we kind of get this scene where Mateo and Jon Voight kind of look, they kind of look at each other, and it's kind of hinted at that they know each other. Right now, we don't know from where, but we just kind of get that sort of sense that they know each other from somewhere. So they leave, and we cut to this scene of Cerrone, Jon Voight's character, spear fishing, and he catches a fish, and he's just this kind of, I guess I'll take this opportunity to talk about his character, but he's just this kind of nasty looking river guy, I guess he's not gross looking. He's just very, like, he looks untrustworthy, that's kind of the vibe I get from him, but he plays the character really well. The only thing is the accent that Jon Voight is doing in this role is kind of silly, and it's kind of hard to take him seriously. But otherwise, he's doing a fantastic job. He's the best actor in the movie, I think personally. And he has this kind of goofy accent, and he's got this kind of scar over his eye. And he's just kind of this river guy, that's the only way I really know how to describe him, as a river guy. But he's a very interesting character, but he's kind of the something's sort of up with him when we meet him. There's something just kind of off about him. And everybody there, while he's there, he's kind of telling his backstory, and that's when people are kind of starting to sort of feel weary of him. They just don't really, they just don't really trust him. And he's kind of telling them that he used to be a priest, and he decided that wasn't his true calling. His true calling was catching snakes, and everybody's like, oh, interesting, and he's just, like I said, kind of telling his backstory, and then he kind of. They sort of come out and say that, what they're doing, they're looking for this tribe or whatever. And Jon Voight's like, oh, yes, I've seen them. I can take you to them. And he offers to take them. And, they're like, okay, sure. So they float down the river at night. Or we cut to nightfall, I guess I should say, and the crew are just kind of floating down the river, and we get this scene of Eric Stoltz and J-Lo. They're kind of standing outside, and Eric Stoltz kind of giving this monologue about the bugs, their sort of their mating rituals, and I guess it kind of turns J-Lo on, so they kind of smooch, and that's when we get that's when it's confirmed that there's some stuff going on between them. We kind of have a hint of that earlier in the movie, but now it's kind of confirmed, because they get a little smooch on. I guess the jungle makes them horny too. I mean, welcome to the jungle, I guess. But it probably smells like a jungle down there. Anyway, so this is where we kind of cut to off the boat, and it's going out kind of into the jungle, and this is where we get the first look at the anaconda, which is really interesting because most of the time, there's sort of kind of a build up, to in the monster movies, you don't see a lot of it, like in Jaws, for example, there's kind of a build up to it. And they kind of do that in this, but like this shot just feels really like out of place just because we see it like pretty clearly fairly early. I'm not mad at it. It just kind of feels out of place because there are a lot of scenes in the movie where the anaconda is hidden. They do that kind of Jaws thing where they don't show you all of it. But the one thing I can say is that when we first see the anaconda animatronic, it looks fantastic. I mean, it looks great. You can really tell whoever designed it really kind of took actual inspiration from a green anaconda, which is what this is based off of, because it really does. I mean, it does favor a green anaconda. There's a lot of movies that I see where it's like, oh, this is an anaconda, and it looks nothing like it. I mean, the anacondas in the second movie, Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid. There's not even anacondas. Wherever they go in that movie, there's not even anacondas where they go. So I mean, and they look nothing like them. So, I appreciate that they really made the snake really look, very true to the actual animal. I like that. I appreciate that very much, especially because anacondas are really pretty. They've got that really nice green with the black dots and the yellow belly. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. I really like anacondas. They're gorgeous little snakes. Not little snakes, they're gorgeous big snakes. But anyway, this one looks great. The animatronic looks fantastic, and it attacks a black panther, and it wraps this panther up and squeezes it, and basically pops its eyeball out and takes it off, and it's eaten, and we kind of zoom in on this eyeball, which is a really interesting shot, and I really like that's kind of one of the most gory things that happens in the movie, to be honest with you. This movie's not super gory. I mean, it is PG-13, so it's not a super gory movie, but everything works fairly well. And so that kind of happens, and like I said, that's a really nice shot. I like that scene. We kind of cut to the next day. The boat is floating down the river, and the crew start to find these snake totems, and that's when Cerrone is kind of like, these are from the shaman that you're looking for, blah, blah, blah. This is the legend and all this. And Eric Stoltz is like, no, not really. He's like, that doesn't belong here. And they kind of start butting heads, you know what I mean? And John Voight's like, I know what I'm talking about. I live here. I'm from the river, blah, 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 blah. And Eric Stoltz is like, all right, well, I do this for a living. I find tribes for a living. So, I can, whatever, buddy. And so they're kind of getting into it, and John Voight's mad, and he kind of interrupts them while they're shooting the documentary, and he's like, just drop me off at the next village, drop me off, I don't care. He's just done, he's over it, and they're like, okay, and they're kind of throwing a fit. And then we cut back to nighttime once again. Like I said, it's kind of jumping around here, but it's all right. But so the next night, Owen Wilson and his girlfriend, whose name I did not write down either, so I apologize, they go out to capture night sounds, which means they're gonna go around there and screw around in the jungle, because the jungle makes Owen Wilson really horny, baby. Ka-chow. But anyway, so they go to capture night sounds because they're the sound people, and they kind of start to fool around while they're out there, and they're attacked. We get that POV camera again, and we think it's going to be the anaconda. That's where it's going, and that's what we'd be led to believe. And as they're running, John Voight appears with a gun, and he fires. And it's kind of trying to trick you, I suppose, to make you think he shot them. But what he was really shooting at was a pig. He was shooting at a razorback. That's a good movie too. If you get the chance, check that one out. Razorback, 1984, I believe. Anyway, so he shoots this wild hog, this boar that was attacking him, and he's like, Mateo, cut him up. With this food for a week. And so then, that kind of impresses Owen Wilson. He's talking about, he's like, this guy came out of nowhere and just blasted this thing. I was like, wow. So he's kind of impressed. That's when he really kind of starts, I guess he's not thinking Cerrone's such a bad guy, but everybody else is kind of still weary of him. So after that, we kind of cut to the next morning, and the British guy is playing golf on the boat. He's just kind of hitting some golf balls out, and he's listening to his opera music, and everybody's just kind of meandering about the boat and just kind of hanging out and talking and bullshitting and whatnot. And the boat stops. A rope gets caught in the propeller, and so that's when John Voight's like, well, I'll go down there and cut us loose, sorry, I guess Eric Stoltz says it first. Eric Stoltz is like, I'll go down there and cut us loose. And John Voight's like, no, this river can kill you in 1,000 ways. And Eric Stoltz was like, all right, buddy, I got this. I got it. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. I don't need you. And John Voight's like, okay, whatever. So they're kind of butting heads on who's going to go in the river, kind of having a pissing contest or a dick wet measuring contest or whatever kind of contest you want to call it. Male egos butting heads. It happens sometimes. Sorry about that. My dog's trying to get in the door. So anyway, Stoltz jumps off into the river with his diving equipment, and he's down there cutting the rope loose. And that's when we get the POV coming up behind him. And again, we think it's going to be the Anaconda. Love these POV shots, and I love the underwater shots, by the way. They're great. We don't get a whole bunch of them, but I really do like all the water stuff. All the camera going just over the water, going under the water. It looks great. I really like all that stuff. Like I said, especially the POVs. But that's when Eric Stoltz just starts to freak out. He's like, and bubbles are coming up, and he's losing it, and we think he's being attacked. And he kind of is being attacked, but by something completely different. So the crew pulls him up onto the boat, and he's unconscious. And so they take his respirator out and take his goggles off, and they open his mouth, and there's a wasp inside of his mouth. So Mateo pulls the wasp out, and he basically says that this wasp is very deadly, and he has been stung, and, the guy's not breathing. So that's when Cerrone comes over with a knife, and he trachs, he cuts a hole in Eric Stoltz's throat, and then he puts a pin in there so that he can breathe. He does the tracheotomy, I think it's called, which that scene always freaked me out. Even as a kid, even now, like that still, I don't like it. Like, it's like, ugh, I hate it. Like, I hate that. That is the one scene in this movie gets me every time. I'm like, oh God, I can't do it. Can't do it. So that happens. And so Eric Stoltz, that basically takes him out of the rest of the movie. Like, he's done. Like, he's going to be basically passed out for the rest of this movie, except for a few scenes, which we'll get to. So after that, Cerrone he's sort of trying to take over the expedition now. He's like, we need to go this way. We need to go this way. And they're like, well, this is the route that J-Lo's telling him, this is the route that you wanted to go yesterday. And he's like, well, I wanted to go that way for a different reason yesterday. Now my priority is to get Eric Stoltz to the hospital. He's like, and this is the quickest way. And they're like, all right, whatever, let's just go, and they're like, he knows this river, let's just go. So they go, like I said, Mateo and Cerrone are kind of leading this now, sort of, in a way. And they come up on this big wall, this big wooden structure that's kind of blocking the river. And they're like, this is the river that I thought you knew this river. I thought you knew, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, this is new. And, they're all sitting there, and he's like, he starts pulling dynamite out of his bag, and they're like, well, you can't blow this thing up. It's going to be an ecological disaster on this river. And he's like, well, we can do that, or we can go around this way and lose 2 days. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. And this part cracks me up. This is when Westridge, the British guy, he kind of comes up and he's like, blow the bloody thing. And they decide that they're just going to blow the shit out of this wall, and so Owen Wilson, and whose name is Gary in the movie, I believe. I apologize for, using all their actor names. Owen Wilson and John Voight, Cerrone, they kind of take this little boat over to the wall, and there Owen Wilson's in the water, and this part's kind of freaky too, especially if you have a fear of water and you have a fear of animals in the water and stuff. But it's this cool scene of Owen Wilson. He's kind of at the bottom of this wall and he's placing the dynamite and stuff, and there's kind of this POV coming up behind him, and Cerrone pulls him out of the water, and then we look down and we just kind of see the water swirling a little bit, and John Voight, or Owen Wilson's like, there's something down there, and John Voight's like, yes, there is, and I think Owen Wilson's like, I'm serious. And he's like, I'm serious too, and I love stuff like that. Just little hints to things. Like, you don't have to show everything, all the time. And this movie handles that really well. I think this movie is probably not the last, but probably one of the last films that handled the CGI and animatronic really well, in the 90s. I think it did it fairly well. Again, we'll get into the CGI in just a little bit because it's shoddy, at times, but at sometimes it's not terrible. But anyway, so they go back to the main boat. They blow this wall up, and the concussion from the blast kind of knocks the boat kind of sideways, the main boat, and all of their fuel barrels roll overboard. And so, this is funny too, because John Voight there's a scene of him just trying to dive and catch it, and he just lands flat, on his stomach while he's trying to catch this. And I don't know why, but that scene always cracked me up. But yeah, so they lose their fuel, and basically baby anacondas just rain all over the boat. Some of them are, boa constrictors and different species of snakes, but some of them are, I just lost the word. They're prop anacondas, I guess, or they're little animatronic anacondas, and they don't look half bad. Again, they look like actual anacondas. They have the color, they did the color right, and I like that, but there's these babies all over the boat, and British guy's got one on his finger. It's chewing on his finger, and he can't get it off, which, you can just reach over and kind of pull him off. He waits for, oh my God. He waits for John Voight to come over and pull the snake off of his finger. And he's basically just hosing off all the snakes. And he's like, these are babies, go back to your mother, And so they clear all the snakes off, and they're like, well, shit, we're out of fuel. This is only enough for like another day or so, on the river. So they know they're kind of screwed. So anyway, they take off and they keep going, and J-Lo is kind of talking, I think she was talking to Ice Cube about this, or the British guy. She was kind of talking about how Cerrone's sort of taken over the expedition, how they don't really like it. And about that time they come up on Danny Trejo's boat from the beginning. It's wrecked, and it's kind of off in these trees. Again, I kind of like this little area that they filmed in. It's real spooky looking. I like stuff like this little swampy area that they're in. So, they're saying, there could be fuel on this boat. We need to go check it out. So Mateo and John Voight, they get in the water, and it's, probably waist deep, if not maybe chest deep, give or take. It's, so they're just kind of wading through this water, and Ice Cube decides to go with them with his camera so that he can get some footage. So they're kind of wading through this water. We get on the wreckage of the boat. They're just kind of looking around. We see this newspaper clipping of John Voight, Mateo, and Danny Trejo from the beginning, all holding a big anaconda. So that really confirms that they all know each other. So that's when your suspicions really start to go up. Something's up here, especially if Mateo and Cerrone know each other and they're not saying anything. It's kind of sketchy. So they don't find any fuel, but they do find this big crate. I forgot to mention that John Voight hides that newspaper clipping. He kind of takes it off and he keeps it, so he can hide it so the others don't see it, or at least so Ice Cube doesn't see it. But anyway, they end up getting this crate, and they bring it back, and they're kind of floating across they're wading across this water, holding this crate, and Mateo is still on the boat, and they're hollering at him. They're like, Mateo, come on. And so Mateo, he falls off the boat while he's trying to get off. And this is when we see, I think, the first CGI anaconda, and it grabs him, coils him up, and then squeezes him. And this is intercut with the animatronic anaconda, which is wrapped around Mateo. So as far as the CG goes, I'll just stop and talk about it now, since, like I said, I think this is our first instance of CGI. It's not terrible all the time. Of course, it's not Jurassic Park quality, which, from a few years earlier. But I must say, I hear people trash on the CGI in this movie all the time. That's one thing that people bring up all the time is how shitty the CGI is. But I've seen much, much worse CGI in films around this time and after this. And honestly, I don't think it's terrible. And especially like in this scene, it's not awful. I think it's just like, it just looks odd. I don't think that the CG... I think the scenes that are done best is when the CGI is not interacting with people, except for one scene in particular, which I'll talk about. But as far as this scene goes, like I said, I don't think the CG looks terrible. I mean, honestly, the CGI in the second movie looks 10 times worse, and that movie came out like 7 years later, give or take. I can't remember. So I don't think the CG in this movie is just awful. I can defend it, and the animatronic is done well enough that I'll give it a pass. It doesn't bother me. I think it looks fine. It's not the greatest CGI ever. Again, like I said, it's not Jurassic Park quality, but it's not terrible. So anyway, this CGI Anaconda wraps up Mateo and ends up breaking his neck. And so that's when we kind of cut back to the boat with Ice Cube and John Voight have come back with this crate, and they're kind of unpacking it. And as he's unpacking it, they're like, "Where's Mateo? Where's Mateo?" So Ice Cube's like, "I'll go back and find him." So Ice Cube gets back in the water and he heads back over to the boat and he's looking around for him. And J-Lo is like telling John Voight, she's like, "You need to go help him look. You need to go help him find him. What if something happened to him?" And he's like, "Maybe some other time." He's like, he's not interested at all because he knows, like Cerrone knows what happened. He knows that the snake got him. He knows that this snake is out there. Around this time, that's whenever he, like I said, is unpacking all this stuff. He unrolls this skin of this anaconda, and it's huge. And by this time, Ice Cube has made it back. He only found the flashlight. He only found Mateo's flashlight. So we know Mateo is gone. Like I said, John Voight unrolls this skin. It's massive. And they're like, "There's snakes out there this big." And John Voight tells him, this is a few years old. So this snake is probably much larger. And so it's at this point, I believe, where John Voight basically tells them that he wants to capture this anaconda. And I think he essentially, this is the part where he pulls out the gun and he basically holds the crew hostage. And he's, "I'm taking over this expedition," and it's turning into a snake hunt, basically. So at this point, we kind of cut and we get a scene with Owen Wilson, and he ends up speaking with John Voight, and John Voight kind of recruits him in a way. He's, kind of telling him, this snake could be worth a lot of money if we capture him. We can capture it alive. Think about that, Gary. It could be worth $1 million, So Owen Wilson's kind of, in it for the money, and that's when they decide that they're going to kind of set up this kind of trap thing. And it's not really a trap. It's more like a giant fishing pole. Cerrone ends up shooting a monkey and uses it as bait on this giant pole, with this cable in the water. And they're just basically waiting to catch this snake. The rest of the crew is arguing, and Owen Wilson's like, the documentary's over. We might as well salvage this and film Cerrone shooting the snake. Like he's, or shoot Cerrone capturing the snake. So he's really trying to talk this up and get everybody on board with it. But the rest of the crew's like, no, no, I'm not having this. This isn't good, So around this time, the snake is on the line. They end up catching the snake. Chaos is kind of breaking loose on the boat. They're trying to shine light. Owen Wilson is up top trying to shine a light in the snake's face. John Voight's fighting it. And excuse me, I'm sorry. And then Ice Cube goes to attack John Voight from behind. He's going to stab him. He has a knife on him, and he's going to stab him, and the anaconda's tail kind of whips across the deck of the boat, knocks Ice Cube on his feet or on his ass, and knocks the knife into the water. The boat's kind of getting destroyed. Owen Wilson, he goes down there to protect his girlfriend, and they're kind of climbing up this this ladder, and Owen Wilson gets snagged by the Anaconda because it's now broken loose. I forgot to mention that. The Anaconda breaks loose from this line. It almost hits the British guy, Westridge. It almost hits him right in the face. That would have killed him. That would have been interesting to see that happen, actually. But the snake breaks loose. Then it grabs Owen Wilson, wraps him up, and then they go overboard while the crew is trying to get their shit together to kill the snake. Of course, his girlfriend is freaking out. She's crying. J-Lo is consoling her. We get this cool little shot of the boat kind of off in the distance, and then Owen Wilson kind of comes up from the water, and he's still wrapped around in the Anaconda's coils. Goes back underwater. That's always a really cool shot. I always thought that was really freaky. So that happens. Again, we kind of cut back to the boat. They're consoling the girl. She's just crying, and Cerrone's just there being a dick and kind of doing his thing and just being Cerrone. And then we cut to this shot that I was talking about just a minute ago, where it goes underwater, and I see what they were going for, that this could have been a really, really neat shot, but the CGI just was not quite there yet, so it ends up looking pretty bad. Now, to be honest with you, it didn't look terrible on the DVD I watched. I think I've seen a copy where it looks worse, but it still looks pretty bad. We get this scene of the Anaconda swimming through the water, and we see Owen Wilson basically in his belly. You see the imprint of his face, on the side of the Anaconda in his belly. And that looks pretty bad. Like I said, that's probably the worst the worst use of CGI in the whole movie. To me personally, that one really takes the cake as far as bad CGI in this film goes. The rest of it is fairly tolerable. It's just that, but that one looks pretty bad. If I'm being honest. So anyway, after that, we get the scene of J-Lo. She's kind of putting on some makeup, and she's essentially going to try to seduce Cerrone. So she puts on her makeup, and she goes upstairs, and she kind of starts sort of flirting with him, and it's going to be impressive watching you catch that big snake, blah, blah, blah. And she starts, kissing him, and Jon Voight knows something's up, because he's already kind of on high alert, and he's just kind of taking this for what it is. You're just like, all right, I'll try to get some ass, while I can. And anyway, he's attacked by Ice Cube. Ice Cube kind of comes up behind him and tries to attack him. And Jon Voight, like I said, he knows what's up, so he catches him. He kind of what's the word for it? He kind of dodges the attack is what I should have said. And that's when Westridge hits him over the head with a golf club through this window. And we get this great line. He's like, arsehole in one. He's like, should I hit him again? And Westridge cracks me up. He's a great character. But they've knocked Cerrone unconscious, and they're like, what should we do with him? Should we throw him overboard? Should we kill him? Should I hit him again? And J-Lo's like, no, we've had enough of that. And I'm like, I'd be like, fuck that. Let's kill him. Like right now. Fuck that. Like this guy's trying to get us all killed. No, like to throw him overboard. Let the Anaconda eat him. So yeah, so what they do is they tie him up, which is just stupid. They tie him up on this post that's on the boat. But whatever, it's for the plot. It's fine. So they tie him up. They're just going down the river. And that's when J-Lo kind of goes up to him, and she's sort of kind of talking to him and just kind of, like, I know who you are. She found the newspaper clipping, and she's showing it to him. And that's when she's like, you set us up. This whole thing was a setup. You did this, you knew the snakes were here. You knew this was happening. And that's when we find out that Jon Voight is actually the one who put the wasp inside of Eric Stoltz's respirator. So he has been causing all the little inconveniences around the boat, stuff like that. So that was really interesting how they brought that out. I thought that was cool that they, he ended up being, this was just a long con, and he was in it just for the snake. He basically needed a ride. So after that, he admits to all of it, and it's like, it was a con, I was playing you guys. After that, we kind of go back up, and we found out that the British guy, Westridge, he's been driving the boat all along, since Mateo has died. Didn't know he knew how to drive a boat, but that works. You know, I mean, driving boats aren't super complicated, I suppose, but he's been driving the boat, and we get this, you know, I don't want to say foreshadowing, but, you know, it's just a way for the plot to set up that he's, you know, spoiler, he's going to die soon. So he kind of teaches Ice Cube how to drive the boat. He just gives him a basic rundown. And that's when they kind of start to get along, because they've been bickering this whole movie. They don't really like each other, but they kind of start to get along and start to talk about, you know, I can't wait to get home for a hot shower, and, you know, the British guy's like 18 holes of golf and, you know, a brandy or something, you know. So they're kind of relating and they're getting along. And this is, and then when we get this beautiful shot where they come up to this waterfall, and it's this gorgeous little location. It's kind of like I don't really want to say a lagoon, but it's just this kind of little small area, you know, and there's this gorgeous looking waterfall, and they kind of pull up to this and they get stuck. So while they're there, they're basically like, we're going to have to winch ourselves out. So Ice Cube is like, J-Lo, me and you are going to go to this tree, tie a rope. Westridge, you're going to go to this tree and tie a rope, and then we're going to winch ourselves out. So they split up. Cerrone is still on the boat with the girl, you know, Owen Wilson's girlfriend, who, you know, hates Cerrone. She wants to murder him, which I wouldn't have left her alone with him. So they go and they tie the boat up, and again, we get some cool little kind of camera shots. It's a very kind of spooky, you know, location, even though it's beautiful. And that's when the girlfriend kind of comes up to Cerrone with a knife, and she plans to kill him. And that's when, you know, Cerrone's telling her, you know, don't never look in the eyes of the ones you kill. They'll haunt you forever. And then he does this wicked move because he's sitting directly on his ass. He leaps up and grabs he's got his hands tied behind his back and his ankles tied, and he leaps up, gets his legs around the girl's throat, and strangles her to death. And then he tosses her overboard and ends up getting her knife, and he's trying to and then we see him kind of cutting the ropes free. About this time, that's when we get the snake starts to kind of come up. We see the water moving over here and the grass moving over here. So we know the snake's coming up, and they're all freaking out. They're like, get back to the boat. J-Lo and Ice Cube, they make it back to the boat. And Westridge, he's kind of stuck against this waterfall, and he kind of gets the snake's attention. He's yelling at the snake, which gets the snake to look over at him, which wouldn't work. Snakes don't have ears. So, you know, that snake ain't hearing shit. But anyway, the snake goes for Westridge. Westridge is climbing up the waterfall and trying to hide from the snake, you know, behind the waterfall. When Ice Cube and J-Lo get back to the boat, they're attacked by John Voight. John Voight has broken free, so he's fighting them and attacking them. So that's why they're kind of stuck. While this is going on, Westridge is killed. You know, he is in this waterfall, and he decides to jump out of the waterfall. And then we get another scene of the CGI Anaconda. It grabs him, wraps him up, you know, coils him up and pulls him up, and then it falls out of the tree and into the water. So Westridge has been killed. We got another bad CGI Anaconda. You know, it's not awful, but it's not great. It kind of slithers over, you know, under the water and everything, and it goes back to the boat where they're still fighting John Voight. Then I can't remember. They end up getting separated somehow, but Ice Cube ends up getting attacked by the Anaconda. The Anaconda grabs Ice Cube on the shoulder and kind of coils him up. While he's being coiled, J-Lo takes the gun and shoots the Anaconda in the head, and kills it. So that Anaconda dies, and it, you know, falls into the water. Ice Cube is unraveled. They're attacked again by John Voight. John Voight comes after him, and he's, you know, they're both kind of going at him, and then he gets stabbed by Eric Stoltz with a tranquilizer dart. And then he turns around, and then we get this also really uncomfortable scene of John Voight trying to strangle Eric Stoltz, and he's got that wound on his throat, so there's just blood coming out, and it's just painful to think about. But anyway, John Voight passes out. They toss him overboard, and then when he falls in the water, we see the dart float up on top of the water. And so that's when, you know, Ice Cube's like, damn, the dart fell out of his back. You know, so that's implying that somehow Cerrone is going to still survive, even though he's completely, he took half of a tranquilizer dart in his back and he's underwater now. I probably wouldn't have survived. I probably would have drowned, to be honest with you. But anyway, so they leave and we get this really bad shot. Again, this is probably another one of the worst shots in the movie, but it's really funny. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But we get a shot of the boat pulling away from the waterfall, but it's a reverse shot. So the waterfall is going in reverse. It's going up instead of down. So that's pretty funny. And like I said, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So then we cut to this scene again. Ice Cube is driving the boat. Then they find this abandoned place. It's like some kind of factory. I don't know what they do there or what was done there, but it's just some kind of abandoned place. And it's really spooky and really creepy. I really like this kind of, I really like this part. Like this old abandoned factory warehouse thing out in the middle of, in the middle of the Amazon jungle that nobody's been to for years and years. It's just a really cool location. And I really like that they added it in here. It looks really neat. It's very spooky. I enjoyed this part. Ice Cube and J-Lo, they decide to get off the boat to look for fuel. Eric Stoltz has passed back out. He fell back asleep. So they decide to, like I said, leave the boat and they go into this factory and they're just kind of looking around and there's all kind of there's just stuff everywhere. And they're attacked by Cerrone, by John Voight. He knocks them unconscious. How he gets both of them, in this instance, I don't really know, but he somehow knocks both of them unconscious with like an old gun or something like that. So next shot, we cut to them. Basically, they're tied up together in this floor in the middle of this factory thing, and John Voight dumps a bucket of monkey's blood all over them, and to, I guess, attract the anaconda. And he starts kind of talking about. Talking about the place and talking about these human bones that, there's a big pile of ashes and he's saying it's human bones. And so that's when the snake comes, a second anaconda. And this is the queen anaconda. So anacondas and snakes don't really work like this. But, in this universe, there is a queen anaconda and the other one was just a warrior anaconda, kind of like bees. But like I said, snakes don't really work like that, but that's how they work here. And this is implied to be, I guess, the nest because there are baby snakes there. We do see some baby anacondas. So when the anaconda comes down, it's we get an animatronic, but it's mostly CG here. It looks pretty rough, but again, it's not the worst. That's not the worst shot in the movie. Talking about you, Owen Wilson, in the stomach. So the second anaconda kind of attacks. John Voight tries to capture it in this big net. The net ends up not working out in his favor, and the anaconda gets out and wraps John Voight and kind of starts to kill him. And this is a really cool scene where he has him wrapped up and you start to see like John Voight's jawbone starts to kind of pop out a little bit and his bones are breaking and the anaconda goes to eat them. And this has been this scene in this at this part is actually really interesting because we get a POV from the inside of the snake eating John Voight. So we see John Voight start to go down the throat of the snake. Looks very interesting. It was a very, very interesting choice to make for this. But I'm glad they did it because it kind of takes you off guard. Like it just happens out of nowhere and you're like, oh my God, like, ugh, that's awful. And it really kind of puts you in that scenario and it's gross, but it makes you think, it's just that would be an awful way to go. Would like to be crushed and then swallowed whole, by a snake. And so the snake eats him. Get another bad CGI shot of the snake swallowing Cerrone. J-Lo and Ice Cube kind of split up and the snake kind of breaks through and tries to attack them again and then throws John Voight back up. And this is also a really nasty looking shot, but he throws him up and Cerrone's all gross looking and he's only got one eye and he kind of blinks at J-Lo and then falls on the floor. And Ice Cube ends up pinning the snake to the floor with like a pickaxe. So J-Lo goes to climb up this ladder, which leads out of a smokestack that's in this, in this building. And she's getting up there. And like I said, the snake is kind of pinned and Ice Cube is like, I'm going to blow him up, so he finds all these barrels of gasoline or kerosene or whatever it is, and he starts dumping it all over the floor. And he's dragging out this water hose, which is like a fire hose, which is basically going to act as a fuse for this. And J-Lo is at the top of the smokestack, and she can't escape. She can't get out the hatch. And at this point, Ice Cube has already lit the fuse, and it's going. So J-Lo is sitting here fighting with this door. The Anaconda is right behind her, trying to get to her, but it's stuck. Wyatt didn't turn around and go back down the smokestack and try to kill Ice Cube, who is shoving things in its tail, trying to pin it down. I don't know. But it kept trying to come after J-Lo. So anyway, Ice Cube ends up taking off. J-Lo finally gets out of the smokestack. She's kind of hanging on by this rope, and she has to jump off. And of course, right as she jumps off, the smokestack explodes. We get this really cool shot of the CGI Anaconda. It doesn't look great, but it's still a cool shot of what they were going for, of the whole Anaconda on fire, falling through the air and into the water. The whole time it's screaming. I forgot to mention that the Anaconda in this movie screams, which is something that anacondas don't do. You know, snakes don't, they don't really vocalize. So, you know, that's an interesting thing, you know, that happens. But the Anaconda's screaming, you know, the queen Anaconda as it's falling, and it falls in the water. And while it's in the water, it's still kind of you know, the whole time, you know, you're watching this and you're like, just go underwater and it'll extinguish the fire. But it's just hovering kind of over the water, and it's burning and screaming, and then it finally just kind of dips under the water, and the smoke sizzles, and, you know, the fire sizzles out, and, you know, you think that's the end of it, and the Anaconda's dead. And but it's not, because then it bursts up through this little dock that Ice Cube and J-Lo are standing on, comes back for one last attack, you know, trying to get J-Lo. And this is an animatronic Anaconda. It's all burnt, and it looks really cool. You know, it looks good. Then Ice Cube finds this axe, comes up, axe to the head for the Anaconda. The Anaconda goes down under the water, and that is the end of that Anaconda. So the queen Anaconda, I guess I should say. So that's done, both of them. They get back on the boat. I suppose they found some fuel, and around that time, Eric Stoltz wakes up, and for some reason, he's not like, you know, what happened? Like, where did everybody go? What happened to Cerrone? Like, I remember stabbing him because he was doing some shitty stuff, but, like, what happened after that? They're just like, well, we'll tell you about it later, you know, and then we just kind of roll credits as the boat kind of sails off. And so that is the end of Anaconda from 1997. Like I said, it's not a great movie. It's fun. I really enjoy watching it. Anytime I put it on, I have a good time. It's got good music, you know, for the movie. I think it works really well. Beautifully shot. You know, the locations are gorgeous. The animatronic Anaconda looks fantastic. I think it looks great. The acting is fairly well done. You know, John Voight, Jennifer Lopez. I've called her J-Lo so many times. Anyway, they all do just fine. I mean, I have no problems with, you know, anybody's acting in this movie. I thought it was I guess the only issue is just the plot is a little silly at times, and we get some bad CGI scenes, but overall, like I said, I mean, it looks good. You know, I enjoy it. This is one I would highly recommend that you see if you're a fan of monster movies, you know, killer crocodile movies or killer animal movies in general. I definitely recommend this movie because it's a fun time. It's definitely a good one to just kind of throw on and watch. It's a good one. I always watch it every summer. It's a good summertime kind of movie, you know, which a lot of those kind of fall into for me, you know, the sort of Jaws ripoffs. You know, I always watch them around summertime. But I definitely think it's one to throw on if you haven't seen it before, if you've been curious about it, or if you've seen it and just haven't gone back to it in a while, you know, throw it on. It's good. You might like it more than you remember. You know, it might be an instance like that. But overall, yeah, like I said, it's a fun time. I enjoy it. And, I guess, you know, you could say it did fairly well, you know, because, I mean, it did spawn, I think, 4 sequels and then 3 sequels. And then I believe there's a Japanese remake or a Chinese remake, or someone remade it at some point, I think recently. And then I think that there's, again, like I said, I think there's going to be a remake this year at the end of the year, around December, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm gonna see how that is. I probably won't cover the sequels. I like the second one. Um, I don't really remember much about the third one, and I don't really remember liking the fourth one. And then, of course, there is a Lake Placid versus Anaconda crossover. So that's a fun time. We might talk about that eventually. It's very silly. It's it's one of those sci-fi movies. So it looks. It's got some bad CGI in it, but it's a fun time. So we might cover that. I might come back for the sequels another time, but for the most part, I think the first Anaconda is a great standalone killer animal film. I think it's a great time. I mean, even though it's not scientifically accurate or anything like that in a lot of places, it's still a fun movie. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the DVD Graveyard. I would like to try to get a little bit more consistent. I know I kind of fell off my recording there for a little while, but I'd like to try to kind of get back more into it, and might do some more of these killer animal movies for the summer. Like I said, they really kind of fit the summertime aesthetic. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's so hot where I live, kind of getting that primal sort of rage because of the heat. I'll tell you, I've been freaking cranky because of this. It's hot down here where I live. Okay. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, stay tuned. This has been another episode.